Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for taking a moment to view my video. Really appreciate it. Please don't mind my background display. This is the board I often use to do a couple projects I'm working on and display some of my coins. Coming back at you, sort of a special theme video. I wanted to do a multi-part series on my favorite coin, the Canadian silver dollar, or the Canadian Voyageur dollar, and its varieties. But before we get into that, thought I would show you this cool medallion. It's to commemorate King George VI crowning, and that's the Queen Mother with King George, Queen Elizabeth. Not the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. But from way back in 1936 into 1937, really cool coin, really nice shine to it. Hope the camera's picking it up nicely. And then on the back, you have Lady Britannia and a few of the countries of the Commonwealth. So we have Canada, India, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain, of course. So India is no longer part of the British Empire, and it was split up in 1948 and divided into three sections. You had India itself, and then East Pakistan, which became East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, and West Pakistan, which is simply Pakistan. And then you have South Africa that left the British Commonwealth in the late 1950s. So pretty cool, something I have shown on my Instagram page. And if you do have a moment, please check out my Instagram page. I am at the Silver Smitty, and I would appreciate it. So my favorite coin, I mentioned it, is the Canadian silver dollar, the Canadian Voyageur, and it ran in silver, 80% silver, from 1935 to 1967. And I'm lucky enough that I have collected all the silver coins, or all the silver dollars from those years. And I thought I would divide this up into a few segments, maybe by the decade, go over some of the history from the decade, and then show you some cool coins, because that's why we're here. So a lot of people think that 1935 was the first Canadian silver dollar. And really, from the series, it was. But actually, in 1911, the Canadian government designed a silver $1 coin, but it was never put into circulation. And so I do believe that there are only three in known existence. I think one of them is owned by a private owner in Canada, and the other two belong to either the Canadian Archives or the Royal Canadian Mint. But yeah, 1911, there are three coins, and the one that is owned privately, I think, last sold in auction for about $700,000. So if you find one in your pocket or in your grandparents' collection, message me and I will take care of you. But yeah, 1935 was the first year the fully circulated Canadian silver dollar, and it featured the Voyageur, or the Canadian coureur de bois, on the front in his canoe, paddling with a member of an Indigenous group in Canada, or Native or Indian, however you want to call it. I think at the time they just said Voyageur and Indian. And great Canadian scene. So I'll put it up close here. Not the greatest quality, but in original state quality from 1935. And then on the back, you have King George V, who would be coming near the end of his reign. So interesting story, or combination of events in the early 1900s. So similar to what we have now with Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria reigned over the throne of England and the empire for years, 60-something years. And she died in early 1901, I'm going to say. I always forget it's 1901 or 1902, but I'm sure someone will correct me. And when she died, her son, King Edward VIII, took the throne. So Edward VIII was a bit of a goofball. He liked the women, he liked to party. Queen Victoria wasn't really excited about him becoming king, but it happened anyways. King Edward had an elder son, and his name is slipping my mind, and he actually passed away at a young age, leaving King George V next in line to the throne. King George V didn't really want to be king, but he reluctantly did. He later married Queen Mary, who really held the reins together for him. He became a very sort of angry, controlling, dominant figure, and ruled up until early 1936. So I'm going to show you my 1936 silver dollar, which is going to look very similar. Actually has a nice shine on the front there and is in uncirculated condition. And then we have a very similar but different image of King George V on the back. So with his death in January of 1936, a similar pattern unfolded that actually happened to George V. So George V died, and if you're not familiar with the history, George V, his actual death was probably in relation to something that his doctor did. So I guess he was getting sick and they didn't really know what was going on. And if you look back at some of the history books, they've actually suggested that George V's doctor lethally injected him and killed him in January of 1936, so he wouldn't be suffering anymore. I don't know the full story there. Sounds like it's true, but you never know. So early 1936, he passes away. King Edward VIII is, I guess, crowned as king, but similar to George V's father, King Edward VIII, George V's son, was kind of a playboy. He was out there. He liked the women. He liked to party. And ultimately wanted to marry the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. The rest is history. He has to abdicate the throne in late 1936 for his younger, reluctant brother, King George VI. So you have Edward George. A little confusing, but much like his father, King George V, King George VI really didn't want to become king. He was so angry that he became king. It just wasn't in his nature. He was very shy, very nervous. If you've seen the King's Speech, we know that he wasn't a great speaker. Ultimately, when you look back in history, he actually was probably one of the most gracious, loyal, loving kings that England has seen. And he really sort of set a path for his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, who really maintained and helped the monarchy flourish. He did a really good job. He did things that normally the monarchy wouldn't be seen doing. He was really seen as a family man. He was often videoed or in photos with his family, and that's something typically that you wouldn't see from the monarchy. So he really helped them evolve. But in 1937, he was coronated King of England and the British Empire. And here is my 1937 coin. It's in rough shape, but I believe it's uncirculated. So there's 1937 for you. And then making his first appearance on the 1937 coin is King George VI, the son of King George V. So seen here without his crown, unlike his father, King George V. So a huge transition in the mid-1930s, mid to late 1930s for the British monarchy. That brought us into 1938, and one of the more rare coins from the Voyageur set, and I'll have to get the exact mintage numbers, but this is one that hasn't been minted as much. Here's the 1938 coin. I'm not sure if it's been cleaned or it's just in very good state, but it's nice and shiny. A great example of 1938. And again, we have King George VI, King George VI on the back. I'll turn these over so you can see both front and back. So to round out the decade, the Canadian Mint actually changed things up for 1939. King George the Sixth, with his wife, Queen Elizabeth, or the Queen Mother as we know her, we're going to take a trip to Canada. And in honor of their trip to Canada, rather than have the typical Voyageur looking dollar, we have the first example of a different variety. And it is, I actually have two examples here. So here's my first uncirculated 1939. It has Canada's Parliament buildings on the front. Just show a quick obverse, King George VI. And if we look back at the front, in Latin at the top, I'll just get that in focus. Fid Forum Regant or Regent. I'm not a Latin expert, but I can say that that stands for he reigns by the faith of his people. And that was in honor of his first trip. That was the first trip of an official king or queen to Canada. And in celebration of that, the Canadian Mint made this dollar. And I have a really cool example of another 1939 dollar, and I'll try to get it in the light here. You can see it's really well toned and tarnished. Here's the obverse view, so lots of purples, pinks, orange hues on there. So that rounds out the 1930s. So as we know, history sort of threw us a curveball in 1939, and that changed how the silver dollar would be produced in the decade to come, in the 1940s. So World War II starts at the end of 1939. The war, although it was declared in September of 1939, didn't really get up and running in the 1930s, or 1939. It more started in the 1940s. Next video, we're going to be back, and we're going to discuss probably some of the most rarest Canadian coins of all, and that's the decade of the 1940s as it relates to the Canadian Voyageur silver dollar. So thank you so much for watching. This is my first installment of my favorite all-time coin, the Canadian Voyageur silver dollar and its varieties. I'd really appreciate comment, like. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have any corrections to what I've said, let me know. That'd be awesome. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good one.